Did you know that over 20% of married people admit to cheating at some point in their relationship? But imagine for a moment that the betrayal wasn't with a random stranger or even an unknown accomplice. What if it was with someone from your closest inner circle? What would you do if you found out your wife was having an affair with your best friend? Picture this: the deep sting of betrayal, the crushing humiliation, and the feeling of utter shock when you learn that the very people you trust most have been living a lie behind your back. That is the nightmare that Rogers, a devoted husband and loyal friend, would soon be forced to face. Stay tuned, because the twists and turns of this story are going to leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about loyalty and love. Welcome back to Relationship Exposed. If you love jaw dropping stories about betrayal, heartbreak, and the hidden darkness behind seemingly perfect relationships, you're in the right place. Today, we delve into a story that's beyond shocking. It's a story about trust turned to dust, a man who spent years building a life with the woman he adored, only to have his world shattered when he discovered that his wife, Emily, was not only unfaithful, but had chosen as her partner someone he considered his closest friend, Jake. Rogers, our protagonist, was once a picture of stability. He believed in loyalty, friendship, and the sanctity of marriage. For 8 years, he and Emily had built a life together. They shared dreams, celebrated milestones, and weathered life's storms side by side. But beneath the surface of everyday routines and shared memories, a treacherous secret was slowly taking root. This isn't merely a tale of infidelity. It's a narrative that exposes the raw edges of betrayal, a betrayal that severs the bonds of friendship and love alike. It's the kind of betrayal that doesn't just end a marriage, it shatters the very foundation of trust. And as you listen, you'll feel the gradual buildup of suspicion that transformed Roger's life into a living nightmare. Let's rewind and explore the life Rogers thought he knew. In the early years of his marriage, every moment with Emily had been filled with promise. Their home was a sanctuary, a place of laughter, shared secrets, and mutual support. Friends and family admired the couple, praising their closeness and the obvious deep bond between them. Yet, as the years passed, subtle changes began to emerge. Roger started to notice small, almost imperceptible signs that something wasn't quite right. At first, these signs were mere whispers, fleeting moments when Emily's smile didn't reach her eyes or when her laughter sounded forced. Rogers, ever the optimist, chalked these off to stress at work or the challenges of daily life. But as time went on, these tiny cracks grew into noticeable fissures. There were nights when Emily would receive a text message and quickly hide her phone from view. There were times when she would be unusually secretive about her whereabouts, leaving Rogers with a lingering sense of unease. And then there was Jake. Jake, Roger's best friend since college, had been a constant presence in their lives. Rogers had always trusted Jake implicitly. After all, he was the one person who had stood by him through thick and thin. When Jake's own relationship fell apart after a bitter breakup, Rogers welcomed him into their home without hesitation, believing that true friendship meant supporting one another in times of need. However, slowly but surely, the dynamics within the household began to change. Roger started noticing that Emily and Jake seemed to share a language all their own, a series of looks, whispered jokes, and secretive smiles that excluded him entirely. At first, he dismissed these moments as nothing more than friendly banter. Yet, every time he witnessed these interactions, a cold shiver ran down his spine. One evening, after a long, exhausting day at work, Rogers came home to find Emily in the living room, dressed elegantly in an outfit that was far too glamorous for a quiet night at home. On her wrist glinted a new, sparkling bracelet, a gift, she said, from Jake. Rogers remembered that Emily had never been particularly fond of flashy jewelry, so this sudden change in style struck him as odd. When he casually asked about the bracelet, Emily's smile faltered ever so slightly, and she hesitated. Jake, ever quick with a retort, chimed in with a half-hearted explanation, but Rogers could sense that something was off. The discomfort only deepened one afternoon when Rogers accidentally caught a glimpse of Emily's phone screen. In a split second of distraction, he saw a message from Jake that read, "I can't wait to see you tonight." In that instant, a sinking feeling of dread took over him. He questioned himself repeatedly, was it just an innocent remark? Or was there something far more sinister unfolding behind his back? Rogers tried to rationalize these incidents. Perhaps he was overthinking things. Maybe his mind was playing tricks on him because of the stresses at work. After all, trust was the cornerstone of any marriage, and he prided himself on having an unshakable faith in Emily. But deep down, an uncomfortable seed of doubt had been planted, a seed that would eventually sprout into undeniable proof of betrayal. Imagine waking up every morning next to the person you love, believing that your world is secure, only to discover that the very foundation of that world is built on lies. That is exactly what happened to Rogers. Over time, he began to notice subtle changes, not dramatic enough to raise immediate alarms, but persistent enough to provoke a growing sense of anxiety. At first, these changes were isolated incidents, a forgotten phone call here, an unusual delay there. But soon, the pattern became unmistakable. Late night absences, hushed phone conversations, and the lingering scent of unfamiliar cologne on Emily's clothes all started to paint a picture that Rogers couldn't ignore. His once certain world was now filled with shadows of doubt. Rogers found himself revisiting old memories, trying to pinpoint the moment when things started to go awry. Was it during a long weekend getaway when Emily had seemed distracted and distant? Or perhaps it was during a family dinner when Jake's eyes met hers in a way that made Roger's heart skip a beat. Each memory was now tainted with suspicion, each recollection a puzzle piece in a dark, unfolding mystery. One incident in particular began to haunt Rogers. It was a cool autumn evening when he returned home earlier than usual from a late meeting. As he approached the house, he noticed that the lights were on and a soft, muffled laughter echoed from the living room. Curiosity and dread warred within him as he stepped closer, pressing his ear to the door. What he heard made his blood run cold, Emily's gentle laugh intertwined with a deep, familiar chuckle that he instantly recognized as Jake's. For days afterward, Rogers wrestled with the implications of what he'd heard. Every time he saw Emily and Jake together, the memory of that night resurfaced with painful clarity. The warm smiles they shared now seemed to hide something dangerous, a secret that threatened to tear apart the very fabric of his existence. Unable to shake the feeling that something was gravely amiss, Rogers began to discreetly observe their behavior. He noted the times when Emily's phone would buzz with messages she quickly silenced, the moments when Jake would linger in the background even after everyone had left for the evening, and the subtle glances exchanged between them that spoke volumes of unspoken intimacy. Roger's internal struggle was immense. On one hand, he clung to the hope that his suspicions were nothing more than a cruel misunderstanding, a figment of his overactive imagination. On the other hand, the evidence, however circumstantial it might seem, grew by the day, eroding his trust and shattering the certainty he had in his marriage. Late one night, as Rogers lay awake in the darkness, his thoughts raced. He replayed every incident, every look, every half-spoken word. His mind became a battlefield where doubt and hope clashed violently. Could it really be true? He wondered silently. Has the woman I love betrayed me in the most unforgivable way? The questions were relentless, echoing in the solitude of the night as he stared at the ceiling, desperate for answers that wouldn't come. Determined to find the truth, Rogers resolved to gather undeniable evidence. He knew that confronting Emily without concrete proof might only lead to more pain, more denial, and perhaps even more lies. Instead, he began to devise a plan, a careful, methodical investigation into the clandestine world that was unfolding before him. The following day, Rogers took a bold step. He mentioned in passing to a mutual friend that he had been feeling uneasy lately, that there were moments when everything felt off. The friend, unsuspecting and sincere, remarked that perhaps stress or work was playing tricks on him. But Rogers knew deep down that it wasn't just stress, it was something more personal, more invasive. In the days that followed, Rogers meticulously documented every odd occurrence. He noted the time Emily would return home, the frequency of her phone calls, and even the subtle changes in her tone. He started keeping a journal, a detailed record of incidents that no longer felt like isolated events but pieces of a larger, darker puzzle. Each entry in that journal was a small testament to the growing agony of suspicion and betrayal. One particularly bitter afternoon, Rogers discovered a receipt tucked into a drawer. It was for an expensive dinner, the kind that neither he nor Emily had mentioned planning. The receipt was dated for the previous week, and the vendor was a fancy restaurant that Rogers had never frequented. His heart sank as he realized that this wasn't an innocent splurge. It was another clue in a series of inexplicable anomalies that now defined his once happy home. As the evidence began to accumulate, Rogers found himself confronting a harsh reality. The dreams and promises that he and Emily had once shared were slowly dissolving into a haze of doubt and despair. The man who had once believed in the sanctity of their bond now faced the painful possibility that the life he knew was nothing more than an illusion. Rogers knew that the next step was fraught with peril. Should he confront Emily directly, risking a confrontation that might shatter the last remnants of his trust? Or should he continue to dig deeper, collecting evidence until there was no denying the truth? In the quiet solitude of his study, surrounded by the silent testimony of his journal entries and receipts, Rogers wrestled with this agonizing decision. The pressure of the unknown was unbearable. Every passing minute was a reminder that the future, once bright and full of promise, was now clouded by the specter of betrayal. The man who had dedicated his life to loyalty now found himself spiraling into a maze of suspicion and heartbreak, desperately seeking a way out of the darkness. As part one draws to a close, Roger stands at the precipice of a decision that will redefine his entire existence. With his heart heavy and his mind swirling with uncertainty, he prepares to take the next step, a step that will force him to confront the painful truth and face the consequences of a betrayal that cuts deeper than he ever imagined. After that fateful night, when the first unmistakable signs of betrayal began to weigh heavily on him, Rogers knew he couldn't ignore the mounting evidence any longer. The pleasant facade of his once happy home was crumbling, replaced by a cold reality that stung with every memory of shared laughter and whispered promises. Determined to uncover the full extent of the deception, Rogers embarked on a covert investigation of his own. Every day, as the sun rose over a life that now felt shrouded in darkness, he became more methodical, more determined. He started documenting every unusual occurrence with an almost obsessive diligence. His journal, which had already become a repository for fragmented doubts and suspicions, began to overflow with detailed accounts of strange text messages, unexplained absences, and inexplicable gestures that seemed to hint at a hidden life. Rogers would sit late into the night, poring over his notes. He would meticulously record the exact times when Emily's phone vibrated, moments when she would snatch it away from his curious glance. He noted how, on several occasions, she would slip out of the room with a look of urgency that couldn't be explained by any ordinary errand. Even more unsettling was the frequency of Jake's visits. What had once been casual, friendly check ins had turned into long, drawn out sessions where he seemed to linger in every corner of the house, always with an excuse for his presence. One rainy afternoon, as the patter of raindrops provided a somber backdrop, Rogers discovered something that sent a chill down his spine. Tucked away in a drawer of their shared closet, he found a small envelope containing several receipts and an invitation to an exclusive restaurant, a place he'd never heard Emily mention before. The receipts were detailed, listing expensive meals and even a surprise celebration. The envelope bore a handwritten note that simply read, "For a special night," signed with a name that wasn't his. Roger's hands trembled as he held the envelope. The evidence was no longer abstract. It was tangible, written proof of an intimacy that he had never been a part of. With a heavy heart and a mind racing with questions, he resolved to dig deeper. Was this invitation meant for him? Had Emily been planning something in secret? Or was it a token of affection meant solely for someone else? The next morning, his resolve hardened as he revisited his journal entries. He began cross referencing times, locations, and even the weather conditions to piece together a timeline of events. Every detail, every whispered laugh he had overheard now formed a coherent pattern of deceit. Rogers even began reviewing old photographs of family gatherings and happy moments, each image now taking on a sinister tone as he wondered what conversations might have taken place behind closed doors. At work, the distraction was palpable. Meetings felt like a blur, and even simple conversations with colleagues were tinged with the bitter aftertaste of betrayal. Every time his phone buzzed with a notification, his heart would skip a beat, dreading that it might be another clue confirming his worst fears. Rogers also turned to the digital world. He discreetly searched through social media for any signs of inappropriate interactions between Emily and Jake. Posts, likes, comments all seemed to weave a story of their own, hinting at a closeness that went far beyond the realm of friendship. In private messages and shared photos, he found the subtle signs of a bond that had grown dangerously intimate. His pulse quickened with every discovery, each piece of evidence adding weight to the painful realization that his marriage was built on lies. Yet, even as he collected this digital trail, the emotional toll was immense. There were moments when Rogers would sit in the quiet solitude of his home, tears streaming down his face as he questioned how he could have been so blind. The man he thought he knew, the man who had vowed to love and protect his family, was now confronted with a reality that was both shocking and deeply personal. The betrayal wasn't just an abstract idea, it was an invasion of his most sacred space. During one particularly long, sleepless night, as the world outside lay quiet and still, Rogers resolved to capture indisputable evidence. He discreetly installed a hidden recording device in the living room. The idea was simple. If words or sounds of intimacy could be captured, then the truth would be undeniable. Over the next several days, he listened to the recordings in private, his heart pounding with each whispered conversation and laugh that he wasn't meant to hear. The audio became a haunting soundtrack to his unraveling world, a constant reminder that the love he once believed in was a facade. One evening, Rogers decided to take an even bolder step. He began to follow Emily discreetly when she left the house. Clad in a mix of trepidation and determination, he trailed her at a distance through bustling streets and quiet suburban lanes. Every step she took felt like a betrayal, every smile exchanged with someone unknown sending fresh waves of anguish crashing over him. At one point, he even observed her entering a quaint cafe that he had never associated with her, her demeanor casual yet secretive. Inside, she sat for a long time, seemingly engrossed in conversation over coffee and quiet smiles. The details of that day, her choice of words, the lingering touch on a cup, the way her eyes sparkled with hidden meaning, etched themselves painfully into Roger's memory. As these incidents accumulated, Roger's mind raced with possibilities and painful realizations. Could it be that the betrayal was more than just physical? Was there an emotional intimacy blossoming between Emily and Jake that rendered every moment together a calculated act of defiance? And perhaps most heartbreakingly, was his best friend the one she chose to confide in, share secrets with, and ultimately love in the most forbidden way? Every new piece of evidence drove home the fact that the life Rogers had once cherished was being systematically dismantled. The journal he kept, the receipts, the recordings, and even the stray glances he observed all converged to form a tapestry of deceit. His every waking moment became consumed with a search for truth, and every night the nightmares began. In these dreams, he would see himself alone in a silent, empty home with memories of laughter and love echoing as a bitter reminder of what once was. Roger's emotional state teetered on the brink of despair. The steady accumulation of evidence did little to ease the pain. Instead, it deepened the wound. Each recorded whisper, each secret rendezvous witnessed, and every hidden photograph now served as a brutal confirmation of the betrayal he had feared. Yet, amidst the heartache and the mounting evidence, there remained a glimmer of determination, a desperate hope that knowing the full truth might somehow lead to a path of healing, or at least a resolution that would honor the love he had once known. In a moment of quiet resolve, Rogers decided that he needed one final piece of proof, a moment so undeniable that it would leave no room for doubt. The plan was risky, but the need for confirmation outweighed the potential consequences. That evening, as darkness enveloped the city and the familiar sounds of the night set in, Rogers prepared to set his most critical plan into motion. He positioned a hidden camera in the living room, carefully choosing a spot that overlooked the area where Emily and Jake spent most of their time. With trembling hands and a heart pounding in his chest, he activated the device, knowing that every second counted. The idea was to capture the raw, unfiltered truth, a moment of intimacy so blatant that it would erase any lingering doubts. The night stretched long and torturous as Roger sat in his car, the soft hum of the engine and the distant city lights the only companions to his anxiety. Every minute felt like an eternity. The anticipation was a physical weight, pressing down on him as he repeatedly checked his phone for any sign that the camera was capturing something significant. Then, just as the clock ticked past midnight, the moment arrived. A faint glow appeared on the screen, and as the minutes slowly unfolded, the footage revealed what Rogers had dreaded most. His eyes widened in horror as he watched Emily and Jake, oblivious to his presence, drawn into an embrace that spoke of intimacy and secrets. Their closeness was palpable, the physical language of their connection unmistakable. The camera recorded every detail, the way Emily's hand lingered on Jake's arm, the soft murmurs they exchanged, and the passionate kiss that sealed the betrayal. In that moment, the evidence was irrefutable. The camera's silent testimony, recorded for all eternity, bore witness to the collapse of everything Rogers had once believed in. The raw emotion of that captured scene would haunt him forever, a visual indictment of the love and loyalty that had been so cruelly betrayed. As Rogers watched the footage over and over, a storm of emotions raged within him. Anger, sorrow, disbelief, all mingled together, creating a tumultuous cocktail that left him numb and broken. It was a moment of truth that stripped away all pretense, leaving only the harsh reality of infidelity and deception. And with that undeniable proof, Rogers knew that the next steps would be both inevitable and painful. The night had already grown heavy with an almost tangible sense of foreboding when Rogers, trembling with a mix of dread and resolve, set his final plan in motion. The hidden camera, carefully positioned in the living room where Emily and Jake often retreated, was now his sole hope for undeniable proof. Every fiber of his being urged him to capture the truth, no matter how devastating it might be. Sitting in his car, parked in the shadow of his own home, Rogers stared intently at the glow of his phone screen. The minutes dragged on, each one stretching his anxiety to its breaking point. Outside, the city was wrapped in silence, as if the world itself was holding its breath in anticipation of the revelation that was about to unfold. Then, almost imperceptibly at first, a movement appeared on the screen. Roger's heart pounded in his ears. The camera feed slowly revealed Emily entering the living room. Her posture was relaxed, as if nothing was amiss, yet every detail seemed laced with a secret she was determined to keep hidden. Moments later, Jake appeared, a figure once synonymous with friendship, now cast in a role of betrayal. In those long, agonizing minutes that followed, every action was scrutinized. The camera captured the way Emily's eyes flickered with something unspoken as she exchanged a knowing look with Jake. Their conversation was hushed, the sounds nearly swallowed by the ambient noise of the night. But then it happened, a moment so raw and undeniable that it shattered any remaining hope of reconciliation with the past. Rogers watched, paralyzed, as the footage unfolded. Emily and Jake, without any apparent concern for anyone else, leaned in close. The intimacy of their embrace, the lingering touch of a hand on a shoulder, and the slow, deliberate kiss they shared on the very couch Rogers had once chosen with love, all these details combined into an image that seared itself into his memory. The betrayal was laid bare in stark, unyielding clarity. Every second of that recorded moment hammered home the cruel reality. The woman he had loved, the friend he had trusted, were now inextricably linked in deception. Roger's vision blurred with unshed tears as the weight of this discovery pressed down on him. The sound of his own shallow breathing filled the silence, punctuating the shock with every heartbeat. Internal monologue. Roger's thoughts interweave with the visual details. This cannot be happening. How could the two people I trusted most, my wife and my best friend, do this to me? Every laugh, every secret glance. They were all lies. Lies that now echo in every corner of this house. Roger's mind raced as he rewatched the footage, each replay a fresh assault on his heart. The evidence was irrefutable. There was no room for denial or misinterpretation now. The raw, unfiltered betrayal was there for all to see, captured on camera in excruciating detail. The sight of their intimate embrace was like a dagger twisting deep within him, a physical manifestation of every broken promise and every whispered lie. Unable to contain the surge of emotions any longer, Roger slammed the car door, the sound reverberating through the quiet street. With every step toward his home, his emotions oscillated between numbness and a violent need for confrontation. His footsteps, heavy and deliberate, carried him through the front door, the threshold of a life that was now irreparably shattered. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with the residue of their secrecy. Emily and Jake, caught in their compromising moment, recoiled as if struck by a physical blow. Their faces, once masks of casual indifference, now contorted into expressions of horror and regret. The living room, a place that had once been a sanctuary of shared memories and comfort, was transformed into a stage for the ultimate betrayal. Roger's voice, when it finally broke the oppressive silence, was raw and trembling. He demanded answers that he knew could never undo the damage. Every word was laden with the weight of his shattered dreams and the deep-seated pain of betrayal. Yet, even as he tried to force a coherent explanation, his voice faltered under the crushing realization that no justification could ever mend the breach that had been created. The confrontation unfolded in agonizing slow motion. Emily's eyes darted away, unable to meet Roger's piercing gaze, while Jake's face flushed with a mixture of guilt and disbelief. For a long moment, time itself seemed to freeze, a silent, shared acknowledgement of the irreversible change in their lives. Roger's world had become a mosaic of memories, now tainted with the undeniable truth of infidelity. In that moment, the room felt as though it were closing in on him. The once familiar walls, decorated with cherished photographs and mementos of happier times, now loomed like grim witnesses to his despair. Every detail, the pattern of the rug, the muted lighting, even the gentle hum of the refrigerator, seemed to echo the crushing weight of his loss. Roger's mind was a whirlwind of questions and accusations. How could she do this? How could you, Jake? The words reverberated in his head as he struggled to process the enormity of the betrayal. The person he had trusted implicitly had become a stranger, and the life he had built was crumbling with every passing second. The pain was so overwhelming that for a brief moment, Rogers felt as though he might collapse under the burden of his emotions. Yet, amid the chaos of heartbreak and anger, a cold clarity began to emerge. The evidence was undeniable, and the truth was now irrevocable. This was not a mistake or a misunderstanding. It was a deliberate act of betrayal that shattered everything Rogers once held dear. In the immediate aftermath, Rogers did not know whether to scream, cry, or simply stand in the ruins of his shattered life. The room was silent except for the echo of his rapid breathing and the distant, almost ghostly hum of the television left on in another room. Every detail of the confrontation was etched into his mind. The way Emily's face crumpled into regret, the look of despair in Jake's eyes, and the palpable silence that spoke louder than any words. Unable to bear the sight any longer, Rogers turned away, his vision blurred by tears. He left the room without a word, his steps unsteady as he retreated into the night. He knew that staying any longer would only force him to relive the betrayal over and over again. Instead, he gathered what little strength he had left and made the decision to leave everything behind, at least for a while. That night, Rogers packed a bag hastily, leaving behind the remnants of a life that had suddenly become unbearable. He didn't look back as he walked out of the house, the cool night air a harsh contrast to the burning grief inside him. Every step away from that home was a step into a future that was uncertain, a future where trust had been irrevocably broken and where every memory was now a painful reminder of betrayal. In the solitude of his friend's home, where he sought refuge, Rogers was left alone with his thoughts and the stark, unyielding reality of what had transpired. The silence was oppressive, filled with the echoes of a past that was no more. As he sat in the dim light of his temporary sanctuary, he replayed the events of the night over and over again. Every detail, every tear, every silent scream was a testament to the depth of his anguish. Internal monologue. Rogers reflects on the crushing weight of the revelation. I trusted her. I trusted both of them. And now everything I believed in has been shattered. How do you rebuild a life when the very foundation has crumbled into dust? Roger's thoughts were a mix of anger, sorrow, and an overwhelming desire for some semblance of justice. He knew that the road ahead would be long and painful, filled with decisions that would determine not only the fate of his marriage, but also the remnants of a friendship he once cherished. The betrayal was not just a moment in time, it was a wound that would take years, perhaps a lifetime, to heal. As the hours passed, Rogers resolved that the truth, painful as it might be, needed to be confronted head on. There could be no return to the innocence of the past. The evidence was irrefutable, and the reality was clear. His wife and best friend had chosen a path of deception that left him with nothing but the remnants of a once beautiful love. This truth, as harsh as it was, would be the catalyst for the reckoning that was now inevitable. In the wake of that shattering confrontation, Roger's world was irrevocably altered. The house that once echoed with laughter, shared secrets, and the promise of forever now stood as a silent mausoleum to broken dreams and shattered trust. The taste of betrayal was bitter on his tongue, and every corner of the home served as a stark reminder of the intimacy that had been defiled. That very night, as Rogers hurriedly packed his belongings, each item he touched seemed to carry the weight of lost memories. Photographs of happier times blurred through his vision as he stuffed them into a battered suitcase. Every piece of clothing, every trinket on the mantel was now tainted by the ghosts of love and loyalty betrayed. He left behind a home that no longer felt like his, a sanctuary turned into a prison of painful recollections. Outside, the cool night air did little to calm the storm raging inside him. With each step away from the place he had once called home, Rogers felt a deep, gnawing emptiness that threatened to swallow him whole. The streets, usually vibrant with life, now appeared desolate, as if mourning the loss of a life that had been torn apart by deceit. Even the familiar hum of city sounds seemed muffled, a distant reminder that life continued, indifferent to his personal tragedy. The following days were a blur of isolation and introspection. Rogers withdrew from the world, seeking solace in the solitude of his friend's home, a temporary refuge where he hoped the agony might slowly subside. But in the silence of that safe haven, the reality of his situation pressed in on him with relentless intensity. Every tick of the clock echoed with the memories of betrayal, and every quiet moment was a painful reminder of the love that had been so callously discarded. Family and friends soon became aware of Roger's withdrawal. Concerned voices reached out, offering condolences, advice, and, at times, futile attempts at reassurance. Yet, Rogers felt an overwhelming sense of isolation, as if he were the only one burdened with the crushing weight of betrayal. The support of those around him was a double-edged sword, a reminder that he was not alone, yet also a stark contrast to the emptiness he felt inside. The well-intentioned words of comfort only deepened the ache of loss. For how could mere words heal a wound that had been inflicted by the closest bonds of trust? In the days that followed, Rogers grappled with a whirlwind of emotions. Anger surged forth like a tidal wave, anger at Emily for her deception, at Jake for his betrayal, and even at himself for not seeing the signs sooner. The raw, unfiltered emotion was almost overwhelming, and many nights he found himself sitting in the darkness, tears streaming down his face as he questioned everything he had believed in. His mind replayed the moments over and over again, the hidden camera footage, the furtive glances, the secret whispers, and each replay felt like a fresh stab to the heart. Internal monologue. Rogers reflects deeply. How do I move forward from this? How do I rebuild a life when every memory is stained by deception? I once believed in the sanctity of trust, that loyalty was unbreakable. Now, every promise feels like a lie, every smile a mask concealing hidden truths. The once unshakable foundation of his identity was now riddled with doubt. Rogers found himself questioning the very nature of relationships and trust. Was it possible to ever trust again? Could the wounds inflicted by such deep betrayal ever truly heal, or would they remain as scars, permanent reminders of a shattered past? As days turned into weeks, Rogers began the arduous process of sorting through the remnants of his former life. He returned to the house, now empty, abandoned by the life that once thrived there, to confront the memories head on. Each room told a story. The living room, once filled with warmth and joy, now held only the echo of laughter and the bitter taste of betrayal. The bedroom, a sanctuary of intimacy, now felt cold and sterile, as if the very air had been drained of all life. The process of physically leaving behind those memories was both cathartic and agonizing. Rogers painstakingly packed boxes, carefully labeling each one with fragments of the past, family photos, wedding keepsakes, shared memories. Every item became a symbol of what was lost, a tangible reminder of the trust that had been violated. With each box sealed, he felt a mix of sorrow and relief, a painful but necessary step toward reclaiming his life. Yet, despite the painstaking efforts to purge the reminders of betrayal, the emotional scars remained. The journey of recovery was not a linear one. There were moments of fleeting clarity, a sudden smile at a kind gesture from a stranger, a brief moment of laughter with an old friend that suggested the possibility of healing. But these moments were often interrupted by the resurgence of pain as the memories of betrayal resurfaced with relentless intensity. Rogers also faced the practical challenges of rebuilding his life. Legal procedures, the division of shared assets, and the complicated process of untangling intertwined lives added layers of stress to an already overwhelmed mind. Every step forward was accompanied by a heavy heart and a lingering sense of loss. Friends who once filled his life with light now offered only pity, and the space once shared with Emily and Jake became a battleground for emotions that were too raw to be contained. In the quiet solitude of a long, sleepless night, Rogers found himself alone with his thoughts. The darkness was vast, punctuated only by the faint glow of a street lamp outside the window. In that stillness, the questions that had haunted him began to crystallize. How could he ever rebuild a life when the foundation of trust had been so violently shattered? Could he ever forgive a betrayal that cut so deep, or would the wounds remain forever etched in his soul? The journey toward healing was as daunting as it was uncertain. Rogers realized that forgiveness, if it were to come at all, would not be a simple, instantaneous act. It would require time, introspection, and perhaps, in time, a redefinition of what it meant to trust. The path to recovery would be paved with small, tentative steps, moments of self compassion, the gradual acceptance of the past, and the difficult decision to let go of what could never be regained. In his heart, a quiet resolve began to emerge. The betrayal had taken everything from him, his faith, his security, his vision of the future, but it could not erase who he was. Deep down, Rogers knew that he deserved a chance to rebuild, to rediscover the parts of himself that had been buried under layers of pain. The journey ahead was uncertain, and the scars of betrayal would forever serve as a reminder of what he had endured. Yet there was also a glimmer of hope, a belief that one day the wounds might heal, leaving behind not just remnants of loss, but also the strength born from adversity. Rogers began to seek professional help, finding solace in therapy sessions where he could express the full range of his emotions without judgment. In these sessions, he learned that healing was not about forgetting or condoning what had happened, but about finding a way to move forward despite it. Each session was a step toward reclaiming his identity, a slow and painful journey of rediscovery that taught him that it was possible to rebuild even from the deepest of wounds. He also started reconnecting with old friends, those who had always been there to offer genuine support. Through these interactions, Rogers began to realize that while betrayal had stripped away much of his innocence, it had not robbed him of his resilience. The small moments of kindness, a shared coffee, a long walk in the park, a heartfelt conversation became the building blocks of a new beginning. Roger's internal struggle was far from over. The nights remained long and the memories of betrayal still haunted him. But as time passed, he found that the intensity of his pain began to ebb, replaced gradually by a cautious optimism. He started to write again, journaling his thoughts, his setbacks, and his small victories. The act of writing became a cathartic release, a way to transform the chaos of his emotions into something tangible, something that could be revisited and understood. Internal monologue. Rogers reflects with a quiet, measured tone. I may never forget the betrayal, but I refuse to let it define me. I am more than the sum of my scars. I have the strength to rebuild, to find a new kind of happiness that is not tainted by the past. The process of healing was not linear. There were days when the pain surged unexpectedly, a familiar song on the radio, a shared joke from the past, and for a moment, Rogers would be transported back to that fateful night. Yet, with each passing day, the memories began to lose their sharpness, becoming just one part of a larger, more complex narrative of loss and recovery. As he looked toward the future, Rogers began to reimagine what life could be. The betrayal had altered everything, but it also forced him to re examine his values, his priorities, and the kind of relationships he truly wanted. It was a painful but transformative process, one that ultimately led him to a deeper understanding of himself. In a final act of closure, Rogers decided to hold a small gathering, a farewell to the past, and a tentative welcome to the future. Inviting only a few close friends, he shared his story not to relive the pain, but to reclaim his narrative. In that intimate setting, he spoke of betrayal, of loss, and of the slow, sometimes agonizing journey toward healing. His voice trembled with raw emotion, but as he finished, there was a sense of release, a recognition that while the wounds might never fully disappear, they no longer had to define his life.